You don't tell me anything anymore. That sentence can land strangely, especially when the person saying it isn't exactly wrong. Maybe you don't. Maybe you used to. Maybe there was a time when something happened and they were the first person you reached out to. It used to feel natural to bring any little thing to them. And then somewhere along the way, that changed. Not overnight. It's not like you pulled a Shirley Temple and decided from now on, I'm pulling back, stomping your feet and walking away. It was far more drawn out than that. So when they say you've changed, there may be a part of you that says, yeah, yes, I have, but not out of nowhere. You didn't just wake up one day and became closed off for no reason. It's not like the relationship suddenly means nothing to you. You changed after enough micro moments taught you to brace yourself for disappointment before you shared details about your life. That is the quiet pullback. And that is what makes it so hard to explain, because by the time they notice the distance, you may have already been carrying it for a while. They just happen to be noticing the silence now. They just didn't notice all the times words didn't feel safe when you brought them to them. When you shared something meaningful and walked away wondering why you even bothered. They may not have noticed how often you had to recover from being misunderstood, questioned, minimized, or met with the reaction that made the thing you shared feel less important than it was before. So yes, maybe you did change, but that change came with history. This episode is about the moment you realized you started planning around being dismissed, because it's not only what they did, but what it changed in you. And that can feel ridiculously unnerving, because now you're not just looking at the relationship anymore. You're looking at the way you learn to move inside it. And maybe every now and again when something happens, your instinct is still to tell them. Whatever the news is, whether it's good, bad, however indifferent, it was relevant to you and you considered sharing with them. But before you do, you hesitate. You can already feel the conversation take shape. Maybe they won't ask much or give you a quick response that deflates your excitement. Or maybe they'll ask too much, but not in a way that makes you feel like they're interested. More like poking holes in your story, turning your joy into something that you now have to defend. And the thing that you were so excited to share now has a shadow over it. Maybe you had one of those days where you don't need a solution, a lecture, or a comparison. You just need someone to simply understand. But you already know that there is a chance that if you bring it to them, you'll leave the conversation caring far more than what you came in with. You may have to explain the feeling, defend it, or soften it so it does not make them uncomfortable, leaving you emotionally exhausted, and you haven't even had the real conversation yet. That is not necessarily resentment. It may not even be anger. Sometimes it's just the lingering memory of how your conversations have gone in the past. The body remembers what the mind keeps trying to excuse. Therefore, you refrain from sharing. And from the outside, it doesn't look like there's anything ailing the relationship. But inside, something settles heavy. The way your soul feels when a part of you is being dismantled one brick at a time. Because some part of you wanted to share. Some part of you still hoped that maybe this time would feel different. But you choose silence. And the next time, silence comes easier. And after a while, not sharing stops feeling like a decision. It becomes the routine created from each accommodation you made for them. This is why the quiet pullback can be so difficult to catch as it's happening. It does not always feel like you're pulling away. It feels like you're trying to keep the peace, or feeling like you learned how to work around them. But having to work around people is often how the quiet pullback begins, because you start arranging yourself around someone else's limitations. You begin to know what not to bring, which details to omit, so not to ruffle their feathers. And at first, maybe that feels like a skill or even maturity. And they are in some ways, but after a while, it becomes something else. Because you're no longer simply choosing your words. You're pre-editing yourself before the conversation has even started. And then one day you realize this isn't just you becoming private. This is you protecting what keeps getting mishandled. You're not withholding to be difficult. You're preserving the parts of you that felt bruised after too many of these interactions. And that's quite the distinction. Listen, closeness does not automatically mean capacity. That is a hard fact to swallow. Yet it is true that someone can be close to you and still not know how to hold your joy. They can care about you and still become uncomfortable when your life starts expanding in ways theirs has not. Some people cannot celebrate you because your joy brushes against something unresolved in them. And some cannot sit with your sadness because their own pain takes up too much room inside them, leaving no space for you. That does not mean envy makes them bad, nor their sadness make them wrong. It does not mean every poor response is intentional. People carry things they haven't named yet, which can leak into the way they respond to you. And it may come off as criticism when you need celebration. It may come off as silence when you need presence. It may come out as questions that sound reasonable on the surface, but instead make you shrink. And after enough of those moments, you learn when someone is asking because they want to understand, and when they're asking because they need to bring the moment down to a size they can tolerate. You know when something sacred in you is safe in someone's hands, and when it isn't. Once you know how someone tends to meet you, you cannot unknow it. Even if you love them, even if you understand why they are that way, even if part of you still wishes it was different. That is what makes it painful. The knowing does not always make you cold. Sometimes it just makes you careful. And there's a particular grief in realizing the relationship changed, not because you wanted it to, but because you had to adjust to what it could not hold. Because the relationship may still exist. You may still talk, laugh, show up for holidays, birthdays, family things, casual check-ins. So from the outside, nothing may necessarily look broken. But inside, you understand the relationship has shifted. They still have access to you, but not all of you. And that can feel strange because the closeness does not fully disappear. The care may still be there. The history built still matters, and the bond may still have meaning. But there are rooms inside you that stopped opening for them. Not because you wanted to become distant, but because after a while, it hurts to keep offering parts of yourself to someone who only half receives them. And that is a lonely kind of closeness. Being in a connection, but only as the watered down version of yourself. So often we blame ourselves for pulling back without asking what taught us to do it. But maybe the better question is, when did the pain of sharing become greater than the joy of actually sharing? And that answer may explain more than you think. We're going to pause here for now because that question is not small. That is the kind of question you may need to sit with for a while. Not to blame yourself, not to blame them, and definitely not to turn the whole relationship into something it may not be, but to notice what changed in you. To notice where you started shrinking the story before it ever left your mouth. To notice where silence became easier than hoping to be understood. To notice where closeness still exists, but full access no longer does. Because sometimes the quiet pullback does not begin as distance. Sometimes it begins as protection. And in the next part, we're going to sit with the other side of that. What happens when protection starts becoming disconnection? What happens when the shortened version of yourself becomes the version everyone gets? And how do you begin to ask the harder question? Is my quiet protecting me? Or is it slowly making me disappear? So for now, maybe just carry this with you. If you have gone quiet somewhere, there is probably a reason. And before you judge the silence, it may be worth asking what taught it to arrive. This is Caffeine and Clarity. I'll meet you in part 2.